Hey everybody, this is Mark, and welcome back to Beyond Profit, a global perspective. And today we're going to talk about making a global business plan. Now, if you've been following this channel, you'll know that I've got a series of videos that address sections of a global business plan. And whether you watch this video first or last or both, really up to you. I think there's probably benefit in starting and ending with it. So what I'm going to do is go through the basic elements of a business plan, like what do you want to have included in that, but just really kind of from a really high level. And we're not going to get into massive details, but just what kinds of sections do you need and what kinds of things really belong in those sections. If you want to learn more about what belongs in those sections in detail, that is what those other videos are for. So start here, and then go through and learn about those other things. If you need some additional knowledge, it's a good place to go. And then I would say, once you're done, you've put everything together, then come back to this video again. Make sure you got everything. And if you've got any questions, then maybe this will address a few things for you. So anyway, let's do this. If you're getting a lot out of these videos, I would like to invite you to please like and subscribe. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with other people. I'm all about trying to help people out when it comes to all this business stuff. So if you find this helpful, tell people about it. And in fact, if you want to come study with me here at the University of St. Mary, I'd encourage you to enroll. I would love to work with you. So let's get into it. As I said, the purpose of this video is not to go into a lot of details of what is included in a business plan, but to give you an overview or just show you how to take all of these pieces and put them together. I've spent a lot of time creating multiple videos on going through all those details. There's a whole playlist that you can follow on this. So that's what I would point you toward if you want more detail. But at least for now, we're going to go through this thing step by step and tell you a reasonable order and how you can, what it is from those different pieces that you've gathered, how that goes together in terms of a plan. The first thing that you're going to need is an executive summary. How many of you have ever written an executive summary for a report before? This is something that you write that goes on the front end of your report. The reason why we put it at the front end of the report, but we work on it last, is because it's a summary, right? Once everything's together, then you know how to summarize it. If it's not together, then you don't know what to work with. So the idea is you put your entire report together, and all this is a brief summary of what is in the report itself. Now, before I get into the actual construction of the plan, what the pieces are and what the outline is and all of that, I'm going to tell you something that's going to be a little bit painful for you, okay? I have shown you how to do some initial research that is required so that you can put a plan together. And some of those things included things like a regional analysis, pestle analysis, decision matrix, all of this data that allowed you to start off at a regional level, like you're comparing regions and you narrow it down to one region, and from one region you narrow it down to 3 countries, and from 3 countries you narrow it down to 1. And all of that research, all that information is very helpful to you as far as trying to figure out where you should put your company. But now that you're on the business plan part of that, that stuff can potentially clutter up a plan. You don't just want to copy and paste all that stuff in there and say, I've done all this research, check this out, let me just stick this in the plan. That's not how it's going to work. What you should do is keep that stuff and use it strategically to answer certain parts of this outline that's coming up. Now, that's the bad news, at least for some people. It's like, but I love my data, I love all the stuff that I've done. Totally get it. You've done all this work, you've done all this writing, you will still use it, right? But you're not going to just be able to copy and paste it. That is not going to be the best way to approach that. Now, on the other hand, if you followed the steps that I led you through on things like the marketing plan or the HR plan, right, Those kinds of things you might be able to copy and paste. Because if you're following the 4 Ps and putting together a marketing plan, doing things in that order, there probably aren't a lot of revisions that you need to do when it comes to taking that plan and just sticking it into a business plan as one of those organizational points. So good news is you can copy and paste some stuff. The bad news is you're really probably going to have to be a little more analytical, take your data and put it, kind of recreate it into a new outline. So let's start off with the first major part of the business plan. Right? The first, of course, was executive summary. But now that's a separate document. Now we're getting to the main document. The first section is the introduction. So this is an overview of the company, mission, vision, and rationale for expansion. It should be short. It should focus on the rationale. So this is not a place for you to wax eloquent about your business. Okay, you don't have to say, wow, Scooter's Coffee is the best coffee ever, right? And wow, come to our store. Right? You're talking to your boss or you're talking to a financier. We know Scooters is a successful company. This is not an advertisement or a commercial. You want just enough information to know that, we're documenting success. We're not selling. It's just like it's here. And why are we doing this? Why is it a good idea to make this happen? So there's no mysteries. Up front, you're making it clear what it is that you're trying to do. You don't expect them to know everything about moving that business to wherever it is you want to go. Include what you think is crucial. What's really important to fit into a brief introduction that justifies your purpose. Next, we're going to get into the initial research and the country selection section. And this is where you summarize some of the stuff that you did before, where you're talking about your regional analysis and everything else. Your first steps in a business plan, you're kind of putting together an initial proposal. You're deciding what company am I doing and what region am I taking it into. And then after that, you're doing this sort of decision matrix, pestle analysis, cultural analysis thing, and you're choosing a region and looking at 3 countries in those regions. You don't need most of that stuff for your final report. That's research that you did in order to actually do the business plan. You are getting rid of the extraneous details on those other countries you did not choose. You are focusing on the country you did choose. You probably should have a paragraph in there at some point saying, okay, well, I was thinking about Turkey and Egypt and Algeria, and here's the reason why Egypt and Turkey didn't do as well. And so you should have some analysis in there that briefly talks about what you did with your pestle analysis, how it is that you came up with the one. But at that point, you're really focusing on the advantages of the place you're going, right? And the key question, as it always is, I know I probably sound like a broken record when I say this, right? But the key question always is, what is relevant as far as your business moving into that country, right? Include that information that makes a case that this is what I need to know in order to go there, how it's going to be successful, stuff that's going to be relevant at that level. We look at the different things that you did, right? You did a pestle analysis, explain the numbers primarily on your country. You can draw some contrast with the others, but you're not looking for data on those other countries. Cultural analysis, focus on Hofstede. Any additional cultural analysis you might have done, you can certainly include that too, focusing on your country, exchange rates and currency policy. And then conclude this section with sort of a competitive survey and country selection, right? Why did you pick this country over the other 2? Using the weighted decision matrix table for a reference in order to weigh that risk. With entry strategy, you're going to want to say your mode of entry, right? Am I exporting? Is this a franchise? Is it a greenfield investment? A joint venture? What am I doing? And then this also is an opportunity for you to talk about the legal structure of the business, the relationship between the expansion business and the parent organization, describe and document all the legal requirements necessary to make an expansion into the target country, right? Now, that may exclude a few things. For example, there are legalities that are involved in HR that probably belong in the HR section, right? But here we're talking about, how are you going to make that entry? Again, I have a video on that. You might want to look into that. That will give you what the different options are for entry strategies, just to figure out, what's the best way for your company to enter that country? Okay, so let's talk about marketing strategy. This has three major components: cultural analysis, the plan, the competitive analysis. I'll start with the cultural analysis piece. Now, the important thing you need to do before you get into that plan competitive analysis is try to understand how the culture is going to affect your plans when you go to that country, when you put that business in that country. So, what aspects of your company's product or communication branding may resonate or be offensive to your market? Now, some of this research you may be integrating into the plan, the competitive analysis that follows, but you need to make sure and address sort of a fundamental question here, and that is, how does culture affect product, price, place, and promotion, right? That's some of the stuff that you may build into your plan. But the next major overarching question is, how does it affect the decision to extend product and communication strategies or to adapt to the local norms? And this is a theme that you've seen in many of the videos that we've talked about, right? When we go into another country, we would love to just continue to do our business exactly as we've done it before, because that's the easiest, the cheapest, the most efficient way to go about doing it. But culture sometimes pushes back against that in different ways, and so the question becomes, at what point do we have to adapt? How do we get there? And if you followed my video on strategic management when it comes to international business, with marketing, with HR, this is a question that crosses all sorts of major aspects of business. And this is your opportunity to address that question sort of in a broad way. And then you can integrate different aspects of that answer into the following questions as well. So the next piece is the plan itself. And if you watched the video already on marketing, then you probably have put this together. But the idea here is you're identifying your primary target market, your customer, and explaining how you're going to reach that market. And your marketing strategy, which was described in that video, is following your 4 Ps to structure that plan, to put it all together. And then you have a competitive analysis. You should have been thinking about competition from the beginning, right? If you start with that regional analysis that I was talking about, you're looking at the major competitors that operate within the region that you ultimately decided to enter. And you're looking at different companies that exist within your specific country, or more specifically, maybe in the city that you're operating in. And the competitors that you originally looked at the regional level, probably multinational players, may not be the same or a comprehensive look at all the competitors that you have once you're down on a street corner. If you think about a restaurant, for example, right? Maybe your competition isn't some global brand like McDonald's. Maybe it's a mom and pop shop down on the corner. And so understanding how much competition you have, not just globally but locally, is something you need to think about with this competitive analysis. So you're analyzing the competition. Key question is, you should ask yourself, what makes or breaks your company's success in a country? Explore and research the track record of other companies already located in that country, and evaluate the reasons that other companies are successful in that country. So that's what you're trying to do with your marketing strategy. Next, let's go to the HR, the human resources strategy. That's comprised of a couple of sections. The first one is the HR plan. You want to account for the local work ethic, cultural values, and intrinsic motivations for that culture. We talked about all of those things in the HR video as well. So the idea is to identify ethnocentric, polycentric, geocentric strategies based on local staffing ability, unemployment rate, workforce skill, work source, such as home country, host country, third country nationals, and immigration laws. That's a mouthful. But if you've watched that HR video, then you should be very familiar with what those terms are and how to answer those questions. You should explain how your market entry model affects hiring and budget, right? Are you a wholly owned subsidiary? What is your entry strategy, and how is that going to affect who you're going to hire and so on? And then you need to address cultural norms, right? We've talked a little bit about culture already, but culture affects HR as much as it does marketing or anything else. What values and behaviors can't change across locations? That is, that your values or your practices at your home location are strong and efficient, and it creates your identity strong enough that you can't change those things. How is that going to come across other people's perceptions when you get in that country? Are there going to be clashes there? How are worker motivations, expectations, communication styles, decision-making processes different? And how will you adapt? How much do you have to adapt? What can you keep? So that's an important aspect of that HR plan too. Then you have a personnel plan, which is a little more in the weeds compared to all of that. So you're going to highlight key employment factors in your target country based on local needs and expectations. Things like, and I'm going to read off of this list, recruitment issues, wages, minimum wage, salary requirements, payroll frequency, mandatory benefits, common perks, training and onboarding, data protection regulations, labor laws, time zone issues, right? Think about that. Like, you may be operating in a different time zone. What's communication going to look like? How are you guys going to talk to each other? And then actual staffing requirements and how they affect the budget. So what you put together here is then going to have an impact on the next section, which is finance. So let's talk about the financial plan. Again, I had a video where I talked a little bit about financial plan, how to approach that, how detailed you need to get. Again, I would check that out if you want to understand what I think the expectations are as far as that is concerned. As far as the fundamentals, what of that you need to include in this plan, I think startup costs, cost revenue analysis, break-even analysis, those are sort of key important aspects. But the other thing I think is very, very important is to make sure that you have a written narrative. And it's not just summarizing. It's not just saying we have X number of employees, which is going to cost X amount, which means we're going to make this much money, or it costs this much money versus the profit, right? You want to explain all that, right? You do want to summarize that stuff. But you also want to make sure that you explain to your reader, how did you get those numbers in the first place? Where did you get your research? What assumptions did you make? How did you calculate these estimates? If it gets a little bit too thick in terms of description, then use footnotes, find other ways, maybe include an appendix that goes into some of those details if you think it's a little bit too clunky. But those are really important things. Like if some business person is coming up to me as a consultant and saying, here's my financial plan, and they've got all these numbers, my first question is like, where'd you get them? How do you know that that's accurate? And I guarantee you, any supervisor, CEO, decision maker, financier who wants to put money behind a project wants to know that you're just not pulling numbers out of the sky and that you actually have put some thought into this. And again, other videos, we talk a little bit more about how to come up with that stuff. And certainly there's a lot of research involved in a lot of that, but hopefully you've done your research at this point and the numbers that you have are based on your research. But it's just important, you can't gloss that stuff over. That, I think, is a very important aspect of it because that's the bottom line. If I'm investing X number of dollars and I'm hoping to get a huge return off of this, and you've just given me a bunch of stuff that you just made up, and then I trust you, and then I lose money, what happens to your reputation, right? You get in trouble. So nobody can know this stuff perfectly, but you really do need to document this as much as you can. The next section is export, import, and supply chain strategy. Now, this is going to look a lot different for different kinds of businesses. Like if you're just engaging in something that involves export, that looks a whole lot different than if you're opening a store in another country. And so you have to ask, how do these things affect the behavior of your business enterprise? So does your business have to import products? That's an important question. Most of the time, you're going to have to import something. You may not be able to source everything locally, and maybe you can, right? It's possible too, but you have to think that through, right? What do I have to bring in? What can I take advantage of that's already there? You do not have to specify an inventory management strategy, I don't think, but you should detail the selection of reliable partners and intermediaries, such as freight forwarders, custom brokers, and distributors. I'm going to be honest, I am not any of those things, and I am not an import-export expert. How about that for alliteration or whatever? Cute words together, right? Fact is that if you are interested in learning more about those things and you feel like it's important to go into the weeds on that, there are some great resources out there. Again, I have a video on how to access some of these resources. I can connect you to people who could probably answer those questions better than I can. But I think for the purpose of a business plan, you don't have to get that much in the detail. Just knowing that, look, here's a company that can help me handle some of those things is probably enough for the purpose of a business plan. I do think that you need to discuss logistics and tariffs to some extent, to the extent that it affects your business and how you have to approach things. Next, you need to think about a risk management strategy. And this is where you can actually import some of that stuff that you worked on early in the process when you're thinking about your regional analysis, pestle, decision matrix, all of those pieces together. This is a place where you may be able to plug in some of this stuff. So by this time, after this whole process, you probably have a list of potential risks that are drawn from this analysis that are specific to your country. So you should use the raw data you gathered in those exercises and anticipate, possibly reduce or mitigate potential problems on each of the risks on your list. So you list off these risks. How are you going to address those potential problems? Next, let's talk about CSR strategy. Now, I'm kind of hardcore on corporate social responsibility and ethics. I think it's a really important part of any kind of business enterprise. The name of my channel is Beyond Profit, a Global Perspective, which means that I think that there are things that are more important than just making profit when it comes to businesses, and engaging in ethical behavior is something that's really important. And I do think it's an essential part of a business plan because I think it will impress upon those people who you are trying to impress that you're taking that seriously. Now, not everybody would agree with me. Some people would say, hey, that doesn't matter to the bottom line. A lot of people, they don't care about it, and maybe that's so. If you're one of my students writing this for a business plan, then we're doing it. You're required to do it. But for the rest of you, I think that you can make a judgment, but I think this stuff is helpful. So let me run through the things that I think are important when you're putting together a CSR strategy. The first would be to start with your company's CSR statement. If they already have some policies in place, then making them known and stating those would be the obvious place to begin. Then start thinking about what kinds of socially responsible, ethical, sustainable activities your company performs, and then whether or not they are appropriate for the host country. Are these things that you're going to continue? Do you need to step up your game? Do you know, again, we've got this sort of cultural question of do you do things the same or do you adapt? So think a little bit about that process. If your company does not have a CSR statement or any sort of socially responsible activities or policies, I think you should write up one for your company, at least if you're my student anyway. But hey, otherwise, maybe you should think about what kinds of socially responsible behavior should we do when we enter this country. Then you come to a conclusion. Summarize the high points, and ultimately you want to close with a strong reason why the data that you've presented supports your recommendation for entry. I know I've said this before on previous videos, but I'm going to say it again. Your conclusion or recommendation could be, it's not a good idea to send this company to another country. You've done all this research and it's sad, but like the evidence doesn't support entry. And I know that may seem like a failure, especially if I'm talking to people who are consultants or people who maybe your boss said, hey, I want you to go look at the possibility of moving this country or this company into this certain country, and you come up with some not very good data, and that's not what they're looking for, and you're afraid you're going to disappoint them. But my bottom line personally is that it's best to be honest. You don't want those people to spend a whole lot of money on a project and then they follow your recommendation and you end up losing a whole lot of money, and it hurts you personally, it hurts the company, right? It's better just to be upfront and say, like, look, I've run the data, this is my recommendation, here we go. And then let the decision makers decide, oh, no, I think you're wrong, we're gonna go do this anyway, or whatever, right? Your job is to be as honest as possible with the information that you have. So that's what you're doing, I think, with a conclusion, right? You're selling whatever those final recommendations are. And then you end with works cited. And again, this may seem very academic, but I will say it again, that research is important, and you have to prove to somebody that you got your stuff from good sources, or else they won't treat you as credible. Right? You are not a human being who walks around and has all this knowledge and all this expertise. I mean, I don't know, maybe you are. If you're a CEO of a company, maybe you've got that kind of reputation. But if you're somebody who's putting together something like this, chances are you're not going to make it on reputation alone. You're going to make it on your ability to come up with good data and make an argument based on that data. And people need to know that data comes from good sources, and that's why this works cited is important, whether you're doing an academic piece or whether or not you're doing it for real. By watching this video, you've either taken your first steps or maybe your last steps toward putting together a global business plan. Check out all those steps, be as thorough as you can, but keep in mind that there are still more resources, other things that I can offer you as far as videos, as far as filling in some of those blanks. So please check those out. I wish you all the best in your entrepreneurial pursuits. Best of luck, and I'll see you next time.